Welcome back to our channel, where we dissect the complex gears of the global economy and political landscape. Significant events are unfolding worldwide, reshaping industries and impacting lives. Today, we're focusing on a story that strikes at the heart of American identity and its agricultural backbone. The saga of John Deere, a titan of industry, its controversial move to Mexico, and the ensuing economic and political fallout, including a dramatic response from former President Donald Trump. This narrative involves tariffs, trade wars, farmer loyalty, and the very future of American farming and manufacturing. We encourage you to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our deep dives into these critical issues. Your support, including liking this video, is immensely important for our channel's growth and helps us continue bringing you in-depth analysis. We'd also love to hear from you. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Stay with us as we unpack this multifaceted situation, and stick around until the very end, where we'll offer our concluding thoughts and takeaways on what this all means. For nearly 2 centuries, the name John Deere has been synonymous with American agriculture. It represents more than just machinery. It embodies a legacy woven into the fabric of the nation's heartland. Founded in the year 1837, the company rapidly grew beyond simply manufacturing farming equipment. It became an irreplaceable icon, a symbol of the resilience, innovation, and progress of rural communities stretching across the vast expanse of the country. Generations of farmers placed their trust in the distinctive green and yellow machines, viewing them not merely as tools, but as partners in their livelihood, dependable companions through seasons of planting and harvest. John Deere wasn't just a brand. It was perceived as an integral part of the American agricultural family, representing durability, quality, and a deep-rooted connection to the land and the people who worked it. This long-standing reputation fostered immense loyalty among its customer base, making the company's subsequent actions feel like a profound shift in its identity. Please make sure to watch this video until the end, as we will be drawing important conclusions about the future implications of these events. However, earlier this year, this bedrock of American industry sent shockwaves through the nation. John Deere made a stunning announcement: the closure of multiple manufacturing facilities within the United States and the relocation of these production lines south of the border to Mexico. Specifically, operations from places like Dubuque, Iowa, were slated to move to locations such as Ramos Arizpe. This strategic pivot, while framed by the company as a necessary business decision, felt like a departure from its historical roots for many observers, and most acutely, for the communities directly impacted. The news ignited a firestorm of debate, raising questions about corporate responsibility, the future of American manufacturing jobs, and the real-world consequences of globalization on local economies that had long relied on the stability John Deere seemed to represent. The timing and scale of the move amplified the sense of surprise and concern across the agricultural sector and beyond. The rationale presented by John Deere for this significant operational shift centered on clear economic objectives aimed at strengthening its position in an increasingly competitive global marketplace. The company stated that the objectives were unambiguous, primarily to reduce operational costs. Manufacturing in Mexico offered substantially lower labor expenses compared to the United States, a critical factor in managing the bottom line. Secondly, this cost reduction was expected to directly translate into increased returns for shareholders, satisfying the financial expectations of investors. Lastly, the move was positioned as essential for maintaining competitiveness against other international agricultural equipment manufacturers, who might already leverage lower production costs elsewhere. In essence, John Deere argued that relocating production was a necessary adaptation to the pressures of the global market, a strategic maneuver designed to ensure long-term viability and profitability, even if it meant severing deep ties within the U.S. But the consequences of this strategic decision were immediate and harsh, particularly for the American workers and communities left behind. The human cost was staggering. Over 7,000 workers lost their jobs in the first quarter alone, a devastating blow to families and local economies. Towns whose identities and financial health were intrinsically linked to Deere's factories found themselves spiraling into recession. The departure of the manufacturing giant created a vacuum, triggering a domino effect that rippled through the local business ecosystem. Main streets grew quieter as local businesses, from diners that once served factory workers lunch to repair shops that maintained their vehicles, were forced to shut down. The loss of foot traffic and the sudden disappearance of a major employer choked the lifeblood of these communities, leaving behind unemployment, uncertainty, and a palpable sense of abandonment. It wasn't merely about lost jobs. Entire community structures began to crumble under the weight of the economic fallout. This situation unfolded against a backdrop of intense political scrutiny, particularly concerning the impact on key farming states, a demographic that had provided significant support to former President Donald Trump. True to his political brand and mindful of his base, Trump, who had received substantial backing from rural voters during his presidency, responded swiftly and dramatically to John Deere's move. Facing considerable backlash from agricultural regions feeling the sting of the relocation, Trump addressed the issue directly. In a speech delivered in Pennsylvania, a state itself grappling with manufacturing shifts, the message from the former president was intentionally forceful and seemed clear: punish companies that move American jobs overseas. His rhetoric tapped into the frustration and sense of betrayal felt by many, positioning the tariff threat as a defense of American workers and the America First agenda he championed. He explicitly threatened John Deere, stating, "I'm just notifying John Deere right now. If you do that, we're putting a 200% tariff on everything that you want to sell into the United States." This declaration was a direct challenge, aiming to deter John Deere and other companies contemplating similar moves by imposing severe financial penalties. The proposed 200% tariff was designed to make importing goods manufactured abroad prohibitively expensive, thereby theoretically incentivizing companies to keep production within U.S. borders. This aggressive stance resonated with those who felt American jobs were being unfairly outsourced, framing the issue as a battle for the nation's economic sovereignty and industrial base. However, the complexities of global supply chains meant this seemingly straightforward punitive measure could have unforeseen and potentially damaging consequences. In reality, however, this bold measure threatened by Trump risked creating a significantly counterproductive effect, potentially harming the very people it aimed to protect. The intricate nature of modern manufacturing meant that imposing such a steep tariff could dramatically inflate the cost of goods. The price of a John Deere tractor, which typically hovered around $60,000, skyrocketed. Within just a few months following the tariff discussions and the ongoing relocation, prices soared to over $100,000. This massive price hike occurred because a substantial portion of John Deere's production ecosystem was already intertwined with Mexico, since products, or at least crucial components, imported from Mexico now made up nearly 70% of the new production input. They would be subject to the proposed tariffs. Consequently, farmers, many already operating under tight financial pressure and facing other economic headwinds, were suddenly confronted with bearing this enormous cost increase for essential equipment. This economic squeeze ignited a powerful reaction from the agricultural community, leading to widespread boycotts of John Deere products. Farmers felt more than just financially strained, they felt betrayed. For generations, their choice of John Deere equipment wasn't solely based on product quality. It was deeply rooted in loyalty to what they perceived as an American-made brand, a symbol of shared heritage and national pride. When John Deere appeared to abandon this implicit contract by moving production, the response wasn't channeled through conventional protests or lobbying efforts. Instead, it manifested as a quiet but deliberate action, a boycott. In crucial farming states like Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri, agricultural producers began actively switching to alternative equipment brands. Names like Kubota, Agio, and Case IH saw a surge in interest as farmers sought replacements for their traditional green and yellow machinery, signaling a significant shift in allegiance driven by both economic necessity and a sense of broken trust. The reasons farmers pivoted to competitors like Kubota, Agio, and Case IH extended beyond mere price considerations. Although the escalating cost of Deere equipment was a major catalyst, these alternative brands were perceived as offering more flexible repair policies, granting farmers greater autonomy in maintaining their own machinery. a stark contrast to John Deere's increasingly restrictive software controls that often mandated dealer intervention for repairs. Furthermore, parts and service for these competing brands were often seen as having easier accessibility, a crucial factor in minimizing downtime during critical farming seasons. The combination of lower initial costs, relative to the tariff-inflated Deere prices, less restrictive repair practices, and accessible support networks made these competitors increasingly attractive. The iconic green Deere logo, once a ubiquitous sight emblazoned on barns, trucks, and farm signs across the heartland, began to fade from view, replaced by the emblems of rivals. Sales for John Deere dealerships, especially in the Midwest, plummeted by up to 40%. An Iowa dealer lamented the stark reality, sharing, "We lost more than half of our loyal customers in just 6 months." No one believed this was happening. The boycott was a tangible rejection, reshaping the competitive landscape. The challenges facing American farmers were compounded by a painful irony. While their production costs, significantly driven by soaring equipment prices, were increasing, the prices they received for their crops were moving in the opposite direction. A confluence of global factors exerted downward pressure on agricultural commodities. From 2022 to mid-2024, corn prices dropped by a staggering 37%. Soybeans saw a decline of 24%, and wheat lost up to 35% of its value. These declines stemmed from a combination of global oversupply in certain commodities, the unpredictable effects of climate change on yields worldwide, and reduced export demand often linked to ongoing trade tensions and barriers erected by various nations. For small farms, already operating with narrow profit margins, this simultaneous increase in input costs and decrease in output revenue proved to be a fatal blow, squeezing them financially from both ends and pushing many towards insolvency. This harsh economic reality translated into devastating consequences for smaller agricultural operations across the United States. According to data from the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA, the trend was alarming. More than 30% of family farms operating on under 100 acres went bankrupt within just 3 years. This rate of failure was unprecedented in recent history, drawing grim comparisons to the Great Depression of the 1930s, a period synonymous with widespread agricultural hardship. The collapse of these smaller farms represented not just individual financial ruin, but also a significant shift in the structure of American agriculture, potentially consolidating production into larger, more industrialized operations. It highlighted the vulnerability of family-run farms to market volatility and policy decisions made far from their fields, threatening a way of life that has long been considered central to America's rural identity. This crisis within the agricultural sector signifies more than just a domestic issue. It reflects a concerning erosion of the United States' global position in agriculture. As production costs within the U.S. rise, driven by factors including equipment prices, labor, and inputs, American farmers find it increasingly difficult to compete on the international stage. The U.S. becomes less competitive compared to agricultural powerhouses like Brazil and India, as well as European nations. Many of these competitor countries benefit from government policies that provide stronger subsidies to their farmers, coupled with significant investments in modernizing mechanization and infrastructure, allowing them to produce crops more cheaply. This disparity puts American agriculture at a distinct disadvantage, potentially leading to a long-term decline in its share of the global market and impacting the nation's overall trade balance and food security strategy. The situation underscores the interconnectedness of domestic policy, global markets, and the fundamental economics of food production. Does America, particularly its agricultural sector, have a chance to recover from this complex web of challenges? The answer isn't simple and likely depends on the interplay of 3 key factors. First, the role of the federal government is crucial. There's a need for policies that increase credit availability and provide robust subsidy support specifically targeted towards small and medium-sized farms. Such measures could offer a vital lifeline, preventing them from being swept into insurmountable debt and bankruptcy due to market fluctuations and rising costs. Without targeted support, the trend of consolidation and loss of family farms is likely to continue, fundamentally altering the landscape of American agriculture. Second, recovery hinges on significant investment in domestic production capabilities and strengthening national supply chains. The John Deere example, and the broader issues highlighted by the pandemic and geopolitical tensions, underscore the vulnerabilities associated with over-reliance on foreign imports for critical components and finished goods. Bolstering domestic manufacturing, not just for agricultural equipment, but across various sectors, is essential. This requires creating incentives for companies to invest locally, fostering innovation in production technologies, and potentially re-evaluating trade dependencies to reduce exposure to external shocks and geopolitical risks. Building more resilient domestic supply chains is paramount for long-term economic stability and national security. Finally, U.S. trade policies require careful adjustment and strategic rethinking. The blunt instrument of high tariffs, as demonstrated, can often create unintended negative consequences, such as retaliatory measures and increased costs for domestic producers and consumers. Future policy needs to focus on creating more sustainable bilateral and multilateral trade agreements. These agreements should aim to minimize the risks associated with unpredictable tariff wars, while simultaneously working to increase access for American goods, including agricultural products, to global markets. Striking a balance between protecting domestic interests and fostering open, predictable international trade relationships is essential for navigating the complexities of the modern global economy and ensuring American competitiveness across sectors. Consumers also play an undeniable role. When choosing goods, they are not just selecting a product, but implicitly choosing the supply chain behind it. Supporting American-made goods, whenever feasible, acts as a vote for domestic agriculture and manufacturing, contributing to the resilience of the national economy. The ripple effects of these trade tensions extend far beyond agriculture, deeply impacting other vital sectors like the U.S. auto industry. Much like the situation with John Deere, the automotive sector faces significant challenges stemming from potential tariffs and shifts in global trade dynamics. Former President Trump's administration had previously imposed, and he has threatened further, substantial tariffs on imported vehicles and auto parts, particularly targeting major players from Europe and Asia. This policy is rooted in the same America First principle, aiming to protect domestic manufacturers and jobs by making foreign competitors more expensive. However, the modern auto industry operates on highly integrated global supply chains, meaning such tariffs can disrupt production, increase costs for U.S. manufacturers relying on imported components, and ultimately raise prices for American consumers. The potential imposition of a 25% tariff on imported cars, a measure Trump has actively considered, sent tremors through the global auto market. Major international car companies, especially Japanese automakers like Toyota, Honda, Nissan, and Mazda, who hold a significant share of the U.S. market, over 35%, worth around $50 billion annually, found themselves directly in the crosshairs. This wasn't merely a tax. It was perceived as a direct blow to longtime allies and major investors in the U.S. economy, many of whom operate manufacturing plants within the United States itself. These companies, known for their efficiency and reliability, have spent years building complex production networks, often sourcing parts globally and assembling vehicles in multiple countries, including Mexico and Canada, to optimize costs and logistics. Faced with the threat of disruptive tariffs, these international automakers began preemptively adjusting their strategies, mirroring the proactive steps taken by John Deere. Japan, a car-making giant, responded not with loud protests or public confrontations, but with a quiet, calculated strategy resembling a game of chess. Since 2018, anticipating the potential return of trade protectionism, Japanese firms accelerated investments in diversifying their production locations. Toyota, for example, invested $5 billion in hybrid vehicle production within Japan, specifically targeting exports to Europe and Southeast Asia, thereby reducing reliance on the North American market. Honda expanded its already significant production capacity in Thailand, a country housing 3 major Honda plants capable of producing up to 300,000 vehicles per year, and explored new investment opportunities in Vietnam. Nissan planned the launch of a budget-friendly electric vehicle, The Leaf 2025, priced around $20,000, a segment where many U.S. automakers still struggle to compete effectively, potentially manufactured outside North America to circumvent tariffs. This wasn't a scramble. It was a long-planned response. The strategic diversification by Japanese and other international automakers highlights a crucial point. Trump's high tariffs, intended to protect U.S. industry, may inadvertently isolate it. While the intention is to shield domestic companies, the reality of interconnected global manufacturing means tariffs often punish U.S. companies reliant on international supply chains and drive foreign competitors to invest elsewhere, further reducing the U.S. share of global production and innovation. Furthermore, the increased cost of imported vehicles and parts directly impacts American consumers. Rising car prices aren't just rumors. They are a painful reality. Analysts predicted that auto tariffs could increase the price of imported cars by thousands of dollars. Estimates ranged from an extra $3,000 to $5,000 for an SUV. Car loan interest rates have already climbed, hitting 6 to 7%, making vehicle ownership less affordable. Consumers, especially those on tighter budgets, simply cannot afford new cars at these inflated prices, leading them to keep older vehicles running longer, which in turn affects dealership sales and the broader automotive service industry. The economic pain isn't confined to consumers. It reverberates through the entire U.S. auto industry and its workforce. Small automotive parts suppliers, many of which operate with fewer than 50 employees, are particularly vulnerable. 80% of these suppliers are already struggling, unable to withstand the volatility caused by high tariffs and supply chain disruptions. They face reduced orders from major manufacturers adjusting their sourcing and potentially face closure if government support or large corporate contracts don't materialize. The potential loss of 50,000 auto worker jobs by 2025 is a stark forecast. Regions heavily reliant on auto manufacturing, like Michigan, Ohio, and Tennessee, are witnessing factory closures and worker layoffs. This isn't just about pushing big companies away. It's about destroying small businesses and local communities. The result is a potentially collapsing domestic auto industry, where workers pay the price for decisions made in Washington. Trump's policies, aimed at bolstering American manufacturing, appear to be achieving the opposite, pushing partners away and weakening the domestic industrial base. The European Union and China have not stood idly by. They have responded strategically, leveraging their own economic power and regulatory frameworks. The EU, for instance, didn't retaliate with symmetrical tariffs on traditional goods like steel or wine. Instead, they targeted America's Achilles heel, big tech. Recognizing the massive dependence of companies like Meta, Facebook, Instagram, Google, Alphabet, Apple, and Amazon on the European market, the EU implemented powerful regulations. Meta pulled in over $38 billion from Europe in 2024, representing over 23% of its global revenue. Google raked in over $100 billion from the EU and EMEA region, while Apple banked over $101 billion, constituting 26% of its total revenue, with $42 billion in operating profits from Europe alone. Amazon's Q4 2024 international sales, largely from Europe, hit $43.4 billion. The EU understands this leverage. Through legislation like the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, and the EU Data Act, Brussels effectively controls the digital playground. The message is crystal clear: our data, our rules. Google might be asked to hand over algorithms. Amazon is restricted from exporting warehouse insights. Meta could be forced to share user emotion data with European rivals. They've imposed a 3% digital tax on total revenue generated within the EU, regardless of profit margins. Pay $30 million just for showing up, Google. Furthermore, the EU's anti-coercion instrument, ACI, acts as a stealth strike capability, allowing Brussels to impose countermeasures if it deems a third country's actions, like U.S. tariffs, are illegitimately interfering with its trade or investment. They aren't blocking imports with tariffs. They're burying U.S. tech giants in clauses, subclauses, and footnotes. Brussels doesn't launch missiles. They file legislation first. This regulatory pressure creates significant hurdles and costs for U.S. tech companies operating in Europe. potentially impacting their profitability and global dominance. China, another major economic power, has also flexed its muscles, particularly in the strategic aerospace sector. As a direct response to trade tensions and tariffs, Beijing ordered Chinese airlines to halt deliveries of all Boeing aircraft and stop purchasing parts from U.S. companies. This is a massive blow. Boeing employs around 140,000 people, with 30,000 directly involved in aircraft manufacturing. Its global order book currently stands at about 4,500 aircraft, but roughly 1,200 of those, between 26 and 28%, were destined for Chinese airlines. Losing these orders represents a potential annual revenue loss of up to $12 billion for Boeing. Given that each wide-body plane costs around $300 million and narrow-body planes around $110 million, not including lucrative maintenance contracts and spare parts revenue, the financial impact is immense. If China stops buying, Boeing faces a huge revenue shortfall. This decision doesn't just hurt Boeing financially, it could trigger a devastating ripple effect throughout the American aerospace supply chain. Thousands of subcontractors and suppliers across the country, companies like Spirit AeroSystems, Gulfstream, and Honeywell, rely heavily on Boeing contracts. Reduced orders from China mean reduced orders for these suppliers, potentially leading to thousands of job cuts and factory closures. The U.S. aviation industry, a key contributor to the national economy and a symbol of technological prowess, is facing a significant shock. The decline in revenue from Chinese contracts could force the U.S. economy to pay a high price, potentially leading to billions in losses and jeopardizing the stability of a critical industrial sector. Boeing isn't the only company feeling the pinch. The entire U.S. economy feels the ripple effect when a giant like Boeing struggles due to geopolitical maneuvering and trade disputes. This situation underscores the vulnerability created by over-reliance on major trade partners, especially when diplomatic tensions escalate. In conclusion, the interconnected events surrounding John Deere's move, Trump's tariff policies, the struggles of the U.S. auto and aerospace industries, and the strategic responses from the EU and China paint a complex and sobering picture of the current global economic landscape. The simple narrative of protecting domestic jobs through tariffs often ignores the intricate realities of global supply chains and the potential for severe unintended consequences. We've seen how tariffs aimed at protecting one sector can inadvertently harm another, increase consumer prices, alienate crucial allies, and provoke strategic countermeasures from global competitors. The plight of American farmers squeezed between rising equipment costs and falling crop prices, the potential decline of the U.S. auto industry facing international competition and regulatory hurdles abroad, and the significant challenges confronting Boeing due to geopolitical tensions all highlight the high stakes involved in modern trade policy. Furthermore, the strategic maneuvering by the EU and Japan demonstrates that other economic powers are adapting, diversifying, and leveraging their strengths, potentially leaving the U.S. isolated if it relies solely on protectionist measures. Recovering America's competitive edge requires more than just tariffs. It demands nuanced strategies involving targeted domestic support, investment in innovation and resilient supply chains, and sophisticated diplomatic engagement to foster stable, mutually beneficial international trade relationships. The path forward is complex, and the decisions made today will undoubtedly shape the American economy for years to come.